create problems, crisis, confusion, so that you can manage them. That's the norm. It's not for the sake of Ethiopia. It's not for the sake of the people in Ethiopia. It's not even for the sake of the region. We need to be held hostage indefinitely. It's a sustainable crisis that will have to serve their interests. They create it. When it cools down, sometimes they just instigate another problem somewhere else and continue micromanaging this problem. This is phenomenal. And why they do it?
People to take over those countries politically, but also economically. And that's why you have something like, I think the World Bank says, between 60 and 70% of Africa's capital shifted out of the continent. It's in banks in Europe and Asia and maybe America as well. But these people just do what the colonialists did, which was suck the wealth out and shift it overseas. And until that changes, that is, until there's a new generation or even a revolution that actually takes power back to African people, I think those problems, that lack of development, will continue.
Ukraine, I say there is no Russia-Ukraine war at all. There is no Russia-Ukraine conflict. This is war declared by NATO on Russia. The war declared by NATO on Russia is not only for Russia, it's for dominating the whole world. It's for hegemony. This is an agenda developed after the end of the Cold War. They came up with this fantasy about containing Russia, containing any power, small, big, that challenge them technologically, economically, socially, culturally. They have to contain everybody. To me, this failure of the attempt to contain Russia will immediately move to the east. Containing China is their next agenda. They may be playing a very deceptive tactic on trying to tell everyone, oh no, we have to work with China, we have to do this and that. Their miscalculation about China has proved to be wrong. They felt probably they have the technology, they have everything. The Chinese can only copy. They will never equal them. So they will contain Russia, but make friendship with China and continue taking advantage of that so that containing Russia will be easier for them to do. Now China is out of control. Containing China from Taiwan, from India, from Japan, from South Korea, from Australia. How do they do it? How will they do it? That challenge is coming next. But first they need to deal with Russia. How are they going to deal with Russia and then next move to China? How can they deal with everybody? How do they contain us? Imagine this tiny Eritrea is being contained by them. We're being punished with their sanctions every time. We have to be punished because we're not bowing. We are not bowing to their conditionalities. The Cold War, Russia was the hope for the people of the world when the Soviet Union was there. Unfortunately, leaders in the Soviet Union made their mistake to see the collapse of the Soviet Union, which was a historic tragedy. As you at one point mentioned, that was a historic strategy. In the course of the history of humanity, that was a catastrophe. Because the Soviet Union collapsed, the Soviet Union disintegrated them, they felt they can control the world for the coming 50 years or 100 years without anyone challenging them. And that was when this hegemonistic fantasia was developed. Hegemonize. We have seen what they have done the last 30 years. It's a continuation of the same ideology of slavery, colonialism, neo-colonialism, then hegemony. The world will have to get out of this state of affair.
You're editor at a major English-speaking newspaper that I'm sure you read and everybody who's listening reads on a regular basis. Mm-hmm. This editor is very familiar with the work that I do, with the work that my colleagues do, with the Just Transition report that we published, and told me, you cannot believe this off-the-record interview I had with the senior official in the OECD in charge of industrialization. He said the gist of the message is the following: nobody in the global south is allowed to industrialize without our approval. No transfer of technology. And you look at the history of industrial development around the world, and you realize that this is absolutely true. And I told him, well, we kind of knew this, but thank you for giving us a confirmation in November 2023, not in 1823. So you look back at countries that industrialize, and you realized that the countries that managed to catch up with the industrialized world up to a certain point were typically handpicked by the US and its allies, and were allowed to industrialize with actual financing that is favorable to them, with transfer of technology and so on. I'll give you the example of Germany after World War II. Germany after World War II, the official US policy for the first 4 years or so after the war was for Germany to become a backwards nation, never to rise again, an agrarian society. And when Marshall, the General Marshall, showed up afterward, he said, this is not a good idea for the United States. We need Germany to be an economic powerhouse to withstand the Soviet threat, right? So the Marshall Plan did a couple of things. One was transfer of technology and financing, grant-based financing to reindustrialize Germany. And that was a gift from the US. The US gifted 5% of its GDP as part of the Marshall Plan. 5% of US GDP, that's the equivalent of $1.2 trillion in today's money. And just as a point of comparison, last year at COP, the US contribution to the Loss and Damage Fund was $17.5 million, which in terms of percentage of US GDP is 0.0 nothing percent of GDP. I did the math. It's nothing, right?
0.000.
And you have to remember, the Marshall Plan after World War II, it came after a very expensive war, which Germany caused, by the way, which came after a very miserable Great Depression. And somehow the US managed to find 5% of its GDP as a gift. And today, in the middle of a climate crisis, the biggest historic polluter can't find more than $17.5 million to contribute to the Loss and Damage Fund. And as the legendary G77 negotiator, Lumumba Diaping, said when he was negotiating on behalf of Africa and G77, he said that kind of money is not even enough to pay for the coffins of the people who will die because of climate change. And just to put that in context. But back to industrialization, handpicked countries. In addition to all of this industrialization and development support that Germany received, most people forget that the London Accords of 1955, or 53, I'm sorry, canceled 50% of Germany's debt. 50%. No country in Africa today gets a debt relief of 50%, just canceled, right? And Germany, by the way, didn't really need the debt cancellation at the time. If you look at the macroeconomic balances of Germany after the war in most African countries today, Germany wouldn't qualify for any debt relief today. So that's why some of us are looking at the Germany's Ministry of Finance and saying, look, the least you can do is reciprocate, right? Why? Because so many global South countries actually contributed to the German debt cancellation in 1953.
Wow.